So hi everyone, welcome back from lunch, and we're starting the afternoon session. So we have the digital divide and digital inequity implications in the United States. And joining us, we have Dr. Calvin Nobles from Illinois Institute of Technology, and Dario Barrio from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, together with Calvin Richardson and Taryn Willer. They're going to so Dr. Novos is the chair of the Department of Information Technology and Management and at Illinois Institute of Technology. His research interests include cybersecurity, information security, and human factors engineering, data security, vulnerability of autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things, and smart devices. He is the recipient of many different awards, and we have about 50 minutes presentation and then 20 minutes Q&A because you're the only presentation in this panel. So the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to present, and we are very happy to be here presenting at this conference this morning. Before I get started, I would just like to say, just give a little backstory on why this is important. And it's important because I remember in November of 2021, I was invited out to a community college that we was partnering with, and they wanted to show us their cybersecurity laboratory. And we went to the laboratory. It was a state-of-the-art laboratory with some of the greatest technology that I've ever seen, on a college setting. And we had a meeting with some very senior level administrators at the community college. And then at the end of the meeting, a couple of the faculty members said, Dr. Nobles, can you wait back? We want to have an additional conversation. I said, sure. And so during that conversation with two faculty members, they say, our biggest issue is not that our students won't be able to succeed, but a lot of our students don't have internet access. They are part of the digital divide. So, and it kind of hit me pretty hard because it's the first time that I actually heard about it firsthand. And so it really jolted my interest into what is the digital divide and what is its implication. And so that was just share with you a very short story of a school who was very forward-leaning in their thinking, but did not account for the societal issues and the economic challenges that their students are actually facing. So with that, I get into the presentation this morning. And some of the things we're going to talk about is defining the digital divide, the distinctions of it, factors attributing to the digital divide, behind the data. We're going to look at behind a lot of the data with this. We're going to look at the economic disparity, the stress coming from the digital divide, the implications of it, and national security concerns. And so when we talk about the digital divide, we have to define it, right? And so the digital divide existed well before the 20th century. And it was primarily initially talking about the have and have-nots with telephone access. And then after the 1990s, it began to develop and form into its current approach. And so when we look at the definition for the digital divide, there is no universal definition for the digital divide. Some people say it's the have and have-nots of technologies, computer access, and broadband internet. But it's more than that, as we'll see throughout this presentation. But the internet of society defines the digital divide as people without internet access. And I will say from delving into this information, it's more than that. Some researchers define the digital divide as a gap between populace with access to modern information and digital technologies and those without access. But we need to look at it more comprehensively here. The digital divide also is implicitly talk about the distinct phases of the economic divide, the usability divide, and the empowerment divide. And so what's so important about the digital divide is that it's not just resident here in the United States. Even though this presentation is going to primarily focus on the United States, the digital divide is really a global issue as we live in a global society where the digitalization and automation of technology is changing the world. A lot of us saw this during COVID and how impactful it was to be able to transition from physical location to digital locations and still carry on with our lives to a certain degree. And so back in 2015, President Obama stated that the internet was no longer a luxury, it was a necessity. And COVID proved that point to us really hard, the significance of having internet access. However, though, many people in the United States was not able to have this necessity, and a lot of people still don't. 42 million Americans, that's 8% of US residents, don't have broadband internet access. 30 million Americans reside in rural communities that lack infrastructure or minimally accepted internet speeds. And so, as you can see, 8% might seem like a small populace of the population, but we're going to dig deeper into that. And so before we do, let's talk about the distinctions of the digital divide. The economic divide of the digital divide pertains to individuals who cannot afford to acquire computer and digital resources. The usability divide refers to individuals lacking digital literacy to operate a computer. And when I was talking with the professors that on the story that I alluded to earlier about the students not having the background, the know-how to operate the cybersecurity labs, part of that was because they was experiencing digital literacy. But these students did not have cable at home, they did not have internet in their homes. The only thing that they knew really how to operate was a smartphone and a tablet. And we know, those of us that have access to these things, it's great to have access via a mobile phone or a tablet, but it doesn't always transcend into a learning environment where you have to use an assortment of different applications to be able to conduct assignments. So that was a challenge for a lot of the students. And we got the empowerment divide that many people are taking advantage of computers, but some individuals suffer from participation in inequality. And I would say this is a lot with some of our older generations where they haven't had computers their whole life. This is something new. This is a new phenomenon in them being able to participate in the digital exploration that we're having today. And so this is important that we make sure that all generations have access to the internet and be able to participate in the internet and be able to experience that digital participation. But there's two critical issues that really impact the digital divide. And the first one is limited in cost and support for internet access. Not everywhere in the United States they have solid infrastructure for broadband internet access. So that is a problem. And one of the other problems that we have across this country is the cost of broadband internet access, where some companies will tell you, you can get cable for anywhere as low as from $30 to $50 a month. But most of us know that the cost of that for cable at that level, at that rate, is not going to give you the best services to be able to stream data, to really enjoy the internet fully and what it brings to bear. And the other one is the limited digital literacy resources in low and medium income communities. I'm from a small town in Georgia, in Mount Vernon, Georgia, near Vidalia, Georgia, and we suffer from this right here, limited digital literacy resources in lower income communities. It's just an area that's mostly built up for agricultural purposes. And so we suffer from that because the technology side hasn't been integrated into the community or the school system. I was on the phone yesterday with one of our council women back home, and we was having this conversation because this is how my interest really got involved as well, is because I realized that I'm from a very small agricultural community in South Georgia, but yet the kids in Chicago on the South side are experiencing the same thing, and it really piqued my interest. And nearly half of Americans half of Americans in the Black and Hispanic community household do not have internet access. And so when we look at the broadband across the United States, and we look at what's had happened between 1998 and 2017, you can see the trajectory of the United States. It's not doing terribly bad at all. But if you look at some of the other countries, you look at South Korea and you look at Germany, you say, what are they doing differently that we're not doing in the United States? And then it leaves room for improvement in the United States in terms of approaching how we need to build a better broadband internet infrastructure not only build it better, but also build it so it access some of the rural areas, so people in rural America can also take and can participate in experiencing the broadband internet experience. So other factors attributing to the digital divide is that we have 42 million Americans that don't have broadband access. And I say that because in the United States, we're one of the most advanced countries in the world. But when it comes to, equality in terms of making sure everybody have access to the internet and the different communication capabilities that we have in this country, and most of them, a lot of them are provided free, from open source, because people do not have broadband internet access, it prevents them from being a part of the digital exploration and being able to leverage that to have a better quality of life. And so the one thing we also notice in the United States is that the number of Americans using computers and internet continues to ascend on an annual basis, but the divide is also going at an unprecedented rate. And the reason being is because when you look at those that have, like earlier I said, the have and have nots, you notice that those are those people who are educated and have the economic resources to do it. They continue to adopt newer technologies faster and are connecting at an unprecedented level. Those who are economically challenging, those who are not as educated, those groups continue to lag far behind in terms of implementing new technologies and being able to leverage some of the amazing capabilities that we see in the digital exploration. For instance, everybody's been hearing about ChatGPT. I was on the phone with several of my family members and I said, have you created an account for ChatGPT to experience it? And most said no. And so to me, they was like, they never heard of it. And so this is what this slide is really about, is that people who are able to, be informed of these things are able to adopt them and leverage them a lot faster than people who are not informed. And that's a part of that is that digital literacy that comes in, but also you can see the economic implications here, as well as the education implications. And as I alluded to earlier, the gap is extending already along those economic and racial lines. And so we already have Afro-Americans and other ethnic groups who are struggling, who continue to fall behind because they just can't afford it or they are impacted by the digital literacy. And then don't forget our older generations are also impacted by it because they don't have the ability to participate, because this is something new. And the one thing that I really enjoy about it is I love seeing the fact where the younger generation is teaching the older generation, like my niece teaches my grandmother, not my grandmother, but my mother, how to go about leveraging the internet and being a part of the digital exploration. And so when we look at this in terms of household across the United States, and this is something that I find that was really amazing. When we look at rural America, we talk about 5.1 million households that don't have internet access. This is rural America. Well, the areas where I came from, in rural Georgia agricultural areas, I'm a part of that rural statistic here. But when you look at the non-rural areas and you see 5.3% of people, 5.3 million households that don't have broadband subscriptions in non-rural areas, that's surprising. But when you think along the lines of it being economically available and affordable, that's what's driving a lot of this. And then it's further compounded by the digital illiteracy that we face in this country. So when we look behind the data, so what does it mean? Let's start looking at the numbers. So again, what's impacting this? For example, in Baltimore, there's over 57,000 households in Baltimore that don't have broadband internet access. 12 million children are without internet access altogether in the United States. So imagine during COVID, we have 12 million children in this country who don't have access to broadband internet. And then 70% of children in Kansas City district lack internet access at home. And so this list is much longer than this. I just shortened it up here for presentation purposes, but this is very common in a lot of inner cities in urban America where families and kids are being left behind. And so this definitely have some impacts in terms of kids being able to learn and continue their learning when they get home. And so it also impacts how teachers assign homework assignments, because if students don't have the ability to leverage the internet at home, then the teacher is very restricted in terms of what she will assign as homework assignment. And then the other one here is that in a lot of cases, for 22% of the non-broadband users, there's a lack of service. I mean, they can't get service in the area where they live, and that's in my small agricultural community. That's one of the aspects of it, where part of the community has access to broadband, and the other part, especially in the Black and brown communities, we don't have broadband access on a consistent basis. And then the available options don't offer service at acceptable speeds. We also suffer from that. And so this is also very common in rural areas across the United States. And then we start looking at why people don't subscribe to broadband. And you see here, 4.5 million household network deployment issue reason not for subscribing. But then you look at this roughly 16% for other reasons why customers households don't subscribe to broadband. So let's take a look and see why they don't subscribe to broadband. And the very first one, the monthly cost of a home broadband subscription is too expensive, 50%. My smartphone lets you do everything online that you need to do, 45%. You have other options for internet access of your home, 43%. The cost of a computer is too expensive, 31%. Broadband service is not available where you live, 22%, and some other reason I have not mentioned is 17%. So as you can see, people have different reasons. One of the things on this slide that really stands out to me is your smartphone lets you do everything online that you need to do. That's really true in some aspects. But again, as someone who works at a university, as a professor, and I also realize that everything you do on your smartphone or a tablet or something might not be able to transcend into you being able to do your homework on it. And so having a computer at home, having a laptop or personal desktop at home is definitely one of the areas that's impacting a lot of people, because especially students, because they can't do everything. You can't do everything on a smartphone. And then we also, let's look at some more information here. When we start looking at the different populations here of high and low digital divide by counties, and you get to see that high digital divide. Look here at the first column here in rural in rural America. It's very clear that there's an issue there, and then as you move across, you get to see that issue as also we look at minorities. That numbers remain reflective of some of the earlier data points we talked about that also suffers. But I tell you, one of the numbers that really surprised me on this slide is the veterans, the amount of veterans that are actually experiencing the high digital divide. And the reason that number is really interesting to me is because, one, I'm a veteran, and two, in today's military, veterans are exposed to all kinds of digital environments. So I'm really wondering if the veterans that participate in this particular study, where they're experiencing some type of economic challenge, and if so, that makes sense, because a lot of veterans get out and they are challenged economically as they're reintegrated into society as productive citizens. Then you look at poverty. This is not surprising to me, because we talked about it earlier, how the Black and brown community, and not only the Black and brown community, but poor whites who are experiencing poverty also have setbacks in actually trying to overcome the digital divide. And then the disabled, this one, is really hit home with me. The reason it hit home with me, because One of the classes I teach is human-computer interaction, and one of my assignments is about how do we design for people that are disabled. And so we also have to start looking at that from terms of digital divide. How do we actually produce technology and helping, digital and providing digital aids that are able to help people who are disabled experience the digital experience. And so on this slide, I just want to point out that 24% of adults who have with household incomes below 30K a year don't own a smartphone. So again, if they don't own a smartphone, it doesn't mean they don't own a computer, but it also raised the question is if they don't own a smartphone, there's a potential that they may not own a personal computer, because I can tell you that in today's time, a smartphone is much costly than a personal computer or a laptop. And then 40% of those with lower incomes don't have a home broadband service or a computer. You see, I just recently mentioned that. And so part of that is part of that economic disparity that, we really need to look at reducing the cost of some of the digital technologies so that individuals who are not doing very well financially can also afford to be a part of the digital exploration and be able to leverage that environment to improve their quality of life. And there's another phenomenon inside of all of this, and this is the digital distress. And what the research shows in terms of digital stress, when they took a look at survey areas across neighborhoods, what they was able to they used to determine this was a high percentage of homes not subscribing to the internet, or only just through using a cellular data plan, and then a high percentage of homes with no computing devices, or they rely significantly or mostly on a mobile device. Again, you all heard me say this earlier, that's not the same as having a laptop or having a personal desktop. And so these individuals are considered to be living in a digital and stress environment. And that criteria is based on homes that use cellular data on a subscription, no internet access, mobile devices, not only a computing device. And so this is a real phenomenon that's already exists inside of the digital divide, and it's caused by many things, but mostly around affordability. And so here we look at the percentage of homes by digital distress metrics. You see, 11% cellular data only, about 12% no internet access, 14% mobile only devices, and then 8% no computing devices. So digital distress is one of those elements that I personally feel that by working together with academia, industry, government, and nonprofit, we can help drive and lower the cost of devices, computer devices, and digital capabilities to make sure families are able to have that as a capability. Because as President Obama said, it is a necessity. But then the other issue that comes in, talk about is what about digital literacy? How do we make sure that they have the level of digital literacy to be effective while they're leveraging, their broadband internet capability to improve their quality of life, such as going to school online, such as shopping online, such as doing electronic healthcare, whatever it may be that they're doing, and leveraging, like for instance, what we leveraged during COVID. A lot of families struggle with that because they just don't have adequate access. And so we see on this slide, we look at the percentage of the US population by digital distress. And when we look at this, you see that we have roughly 33% moderate, and then we have roughly 21% high. And so that's, that number is really too large. We have a lot of work to do in the United States and driving down that number of digital distress, because we are a rapidly growing society, especially from a digitalization aspect, and we got some work to do to make sure that all of our homes and our population have access to adequate digital connection. And then if you want to break it down, even further here, you can look at it, we got white, non-Hispanic, and you see that number there is what, 48 point, we would say 49%. And then if you want to look at the minorities, you can see those numbers are also pretty high. And then you look at poverty, and that number's roughly 23% there. So you can see there's some, as you look at the numbers, you can, kind of look and get an idea of what's driving a lot of this. And a lot of it is based on that economic disparity that we talked about earlier. However, though, I'm concerned that it's more than just the economic disparity. I believe there's also a lot of literature indicating that a lot of people, can't afford it, and then they also have to have the access to it, and then they also have to have the ability, additional learning resources to help them learn how to use it. Because if you never used it before, you just don't open a laptop and you're comfortable with it. There needs to be some kind of like some grassroots campaign in terms of bringing these programs to the communities to help these families and help these individuals understand, how they can leverage digital capabilities to improve their quality of life. And so when we look at, the United States as a whole, this is really surprising to me when we look at, all the counties that's in digital distress. So primarily look at the blue as counties in the United States that are in high, what we call high digital distress, and those in the bluish green, those are in moderate areas of digital distress. I'm from a very small town in Georgia, this area right here where my mouse is. And this is why this problem is really near and dear to me, because as you can see, like most of the state of Georgia, we live in an area of high digital distress. But what doesn't make sense is that we've got the largest city in Georgia, being Atlanta. It's really thriving in terms of technology. We also have Augusta, Georgia, which is a cybersecurity hub over this area right here. And that area is almost all blue. And so to me, it doesn't make sense. The communities are not reflecting what the technological capabilities are of the cities and the surrounding areas, and the commercialization of the activities in those counties. Doesn't make sense. So it's a concern. And on top of this, last Saturday, I was putting something together, and I was able to go in and take a look and see how many job vacancies we had in the United States. And at that given time last Saturday, we had over 700,000 cybersecurity and information technology job vacancies. So you see why this is a concern. One of the other biggest things about the digital divide in the United States, and this is quite ugly here, is that there is no advantage for broadband companies, internet service providers, to install broadband in sparse community. I live in a sparse community. That's where I'm from, back in Georgia, and it doesn't. This is really sad. I think there's a way that these companies can be incentivized to install broadband infrastructure so everybody can have adequate and equal access to the internet. And so one of the things that the research indicates that for every mile of broadband infrastructure in these areas, it costs about $20,000 per mile for areas with sparse in a sparse community and sparse residency. But this is not new. This is not new to the United States. We got to go back and looking at history books and looking at technical reports. We've done this before when we installed the electrical system throughout the United States. So this is doable. We just have to come to the grips that this needs to be done. It needs to be a requirement. But remember, when we talked about earlier, we only have 5.1 million households living in rural America. So to me, the awareness of it hasn't gotten the right amount of attention to make this a priority. And then, like I said earlier, there are no incentives for companies to install broadband in small communities. And so a study by Deloitte said that in order to completely outfit the United States with broadband, and especially in the rural area, it will cost us about $40 billion. That is extremely achievable. I know that's a lot of money, but it's achievable if we work together to make this a priority for everybody. And again, we need national level policy. This changing this infrastructure is not going to happen without the backing of national level policies and politicians and being involved driving this change that's required. And so again, think about these smaller communities, and not just the small community in terms of not having access, but also think about those in urban areas who don't have access to broadband, who don't have a subscription for it, they're missing out. They're missing out on things like 5G. And 5G has only been around several years now. We're talking about 6G. And so 6G is supposed to be up on us in, I think, 2030. And so now we got a real problem because those families and those communities and those kids are falling, they're falling, just farther and farther behind in terms of being able to understand, participate in the technological activities that we have. Again, COVID taught us a real lesson. We realized during COVID that that digital illiteracy is a real problem, and people were falling behind. A lot of people were not. Some people were not able to work from home because they didn't. Excuse me, they didn't have the connectivity to work from home, so they was forced to go into the office and work in a normal capacity rather than take advantage of being able to work from home. And most of those families and individuals who were not able to do that are those who were economically challenged. And so when we talk about this, for instance, 40% of K-12 students from Black and Latino and Indigenous community, they have insufficient digital literacy. And the problem with that is that when they go to school, they are in classes with other students who have really strong digital literacy and the ability to not only operate a smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop, or a desktop, and then you got a portion of the student who don't. That makes it very challenging in the classroom for our teachers, but it also sends a very sharp message to those students who don't have the necessary digital literacy skills to be able to participate in the classroom at a very high level. And they also suffer this. The other one is digital distress. And one thing that during COVID, we realized that how we use the internet became critical, but it really changed our way of life because during COVID, we started working remotely. A lot of people have not returned to the office. They continue to work in a remote fashion. How we went to the doctor during COVID was different. We was doing telehealth. How we did banking. A lot of people used to enjoy going into the bank, taking care of their banking transactions. Now everything went mobile. And so how we did civic engagement during COVID, we did it remotely. And some of those activities continue as people don't really go into buildings to attend civic engagements now. They do it online. And so it's just a challenge. And you think about it from an economic perspective and the fact that people are suffering from digital illiteracy, they might not be able to apply for the best jobs because you no longer need to be in Washington State to work for Microsoft. You can work for Microsoft anywhere around the world if you have the connectivity. But if you don't have the connectivity, you're forced to take jobs where you can go in physically. So that's extremely limiting. And it reduces some people from being able to attain better employment. And so how do we overcome challenges, the challenge of technology and digital inclusion? Some of us don't even think about it. I know until I got hit with it, face on when I was at the community college, that something I didn't think about. But now that I think about it, it's here. When I go in stores, I'm always looking at the cost of different technologies, and some of this technology is not affordable for everybody. So we still got to work hard to help, drive the awareness and to be advocates to drive down the cost of technology so we can have adequate technology and digital inclusion. And then when we look at, the proponents of the digital divide, again, we talked about you need digital literacy, you need digital skills democracy. We need people out there advocating and people vouching to create programs so that people can have adequate access. We need social mobility where people have the ability to, where they travel and they're able to use their digital devices, they're able to stay connected, because that's one of the advantages of living in an advanced society, is the ability to have that social mobility. Economic equality. When it comes to digital technologies, that's got to be a key pillar in which organizations and the governments are driving towards. And then it can help people attain, economic growth. That's a challenge. Our high school students suffer. A lot of our high school students suffer from this. I work at a university. We have students from all over the world. And one of the requirements is, because I work in IT, cybersecurity, digital analysis, and digital forensics, one of the challenges, we have a requirement for students to come. They must have a laptop. But a lot of our students who come, they don't have adequate laptops. In other words, they might have an older laptop, or they might be using a tablet or something. And so that puts the pressure back on the university to create capabilities for the students to be able to leverage any device. And that's not cheap. That's not cheap at all for us to be able to leverage that. But at the same time, we understand that most of our students are first generation college students. So there's a challenge to that. So we take that on to make sure that they're given adequate connectivity. And not just look at this one, not just school children, school age kids, but 17 million students like internet access in their residency. And so think about a 5-year-old or 5-year-old who don't have access to the internet. By the time they get to kindergarten or get to school age, they might be behind, not just 1 or 2 years, they might be years behind, because kids are exposed to digital technologies much earlier. They have a natural knack for understanding it. They are able to navigate smartphones, tablets, desktops, and personal computers like nobody's business. And it's really amazing. And so we refer to them as digital natives, because they have a natural knack of understanding how to do these things. And so in the United States, we are beginning to take a hard look at the digital divide. For instance, the USA digital strategy came out a couple of years ago, and it's really aimed to strengthen inclusiveness and the openness about how do we address the digital divide and make the change we need. Recently, the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act included funding of $65 billion to expand the broadband infrastructure and improve affordability and digital connectivity. So that's a huge win. Now it's just about executing it and making it happen, not just sitting here and talking about it. So how do we turn this into an actual effort that expands broadband into our rural communities and increase the affordability, so people in the inner city, as well as those in rural America, be able to have digital connectivity? The other thing we really need as a country, we really need to come together, just like we put policy in place, No Child Left Behind. We really need a policy in place where we have no household left behind when it comes to digital inclusion. I see this firsthand now. When I talk to my students, how a lot of them did not have digital connectivity at home, and so they had to use the library. They had to use the high school resources that they came from. They had to use friends, resource, relatives, but a lot of people struggle from this, and it's a real issue in the United States. And to be honest with you, I would say it's something that we've got to get serious about, because we got too many families left behind, and this becomes generational if we don't fix it. And we got my parents' generation, my generation, and now we got our kids' generation now being impacted by this. And so how do we prevent this generational cycle from continuing to go on? Because everybody is deserving to be a part of the digital exploration and leveraging the internet to improve their quality of life. And the other thing we have to think about in the United States is because we have a large portion of our population who don't have access to the broadband internet. The United States, and it creates a learning failure for us. And you shape it around national security, and you look and say, what's going on in the United States? Well, in 2019, immigrants made up 23% of all of our STEM workers in the United States. And so in order for us to change this direction and this issue, we have to get kids as early as 8 years old involved in technology, being on the internet, being able to access different things to help increase their understanding and their appreciation for digital technology. And so the only way we can do that is to start exposing them earlier. And unfortunately, at school is not enough, because at school they're going through a very rigid curriculum where they might not have adequate access to digital technologies on a daily basis at school. And we're talking K through 12. And then you see what happened in the United States between 2000 and 2019. STEM workers increased by 45% to 11 million. All of these are foreign workers. These are not foreign-born workers. These are not U.S. citizens. Some eventually attained citizenship. And then 49% of STEM workers had advanced degrees, compared to only 22% of U.S.-born STEM workers. And so you look at that, it's over doubling that, right? You're like, what do we? I wouldn't say doubling that, but you see the 27% disparity there. You're like, how do we get there? And how do we change that? Because as the United States continue to advance technologically, there's become our national security footprint needs to advance with that too. As the more as we leverage the digital environment, companies are leveraging it, the government is leveraging it, our international partnerships leveraging this digital capability. We must be able to protect it, and so we struggle with protecting it. And like I alluded to earlier, we have over 700,000 cybersecurity and IT job vacancies in the United States. So we have plenty of work to do. And I believe by tackling the digital divide, we can start to make a change and reduce our reliance on foreign workers. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with foreign workers, but we have too high a reliance on the number of foreign workers that we have in this country. And then we don't have enough students enrolled in STEM programs. And the only way that we're going to be able to continue to advance the internet and advance digital technologies, we're going to have people, studying STEM degrees at the university level. And so we got to continue to change the narrative that the U.S., we need more people, more of our students enrolled in STEM. We need them to develop an early appreciation for science, technology, engineering, and math, because that's what it's going to require to complete a STEM program at a university. And with that, I'd like to close and open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much for this insightful presentation. I would like to ask the people here in the room if they have any question to the speaker. Yeah, we have one question.
Hi, good morning. My name is Velo Petai from the European Center for Minority Issues. And thanks also for the PDF that you uploaded into the program, because it helped to really prepare the discussion. And I'm intrigued in terms of the three ways in which you define the digital divide, of course, and what seemed to me a predominant focus, and perhaps precisely because of data availability, on the broadband issue, on the infrastructural availability and the divide, whereas the usability and the empowerment divide question is perhaps less researched or less available information. You touched upon, of course, usability issues when focusing on how people use smartphones as opposed to tablets, the availability of laptops and all of these things. So there that is, but the empowerment one, is there data lacking in the United States about that aspect of the divide? Yeah, I mean, obviously it's difficult to gather that information because it's probably survey based in terms of asking people how much they know about Excel or other crazy things like that. So where do you see these other two divides, the usability and the empowerment, in terms of their measurement, and how we can address those on top of the broadband infrastructural issues? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to the slide here. So, I mean, I think that's a really good question, by the way. And one of the things I would tell you when it comes to the empowerment side, there was not a whole lot of research on it. And the reason there's probably not a whole lot of research on it is because a lot of people don't think about why people don't actually participate in leveraging the broadband, and not just leveraging the broadband, but also leveraging digital technologies. And so I did not see a lot of this. We didn't see a lot of this in our research. And I would tell you that it needs to be something that we do. But the preponderance of research around the digital divide really focused on the economic divide. It was very little that talked about the empowerment, but the usability part, they really talked about it in terms of digital literacy. And again, we see that with some of our students and coming to Illinois Tech, and we are a technology engineering dominant school, but we still have students that show up who never had access to their individual computers. And so it's a real problem. And I think the one way we're going to get around this is really start looking at these distinct areas of digital divide, so we can start, especially as like all of us, we're researchers. So now we can start looking at the empowerment. How do we have grassroots campaigns that help people, participate in this and become, and not be afraid of it, and usability divide. And so again, how do we capture that? A lot of people are not going to come forward and say, I'm digitally illiterate. That's just not something a lot of people want to come and say. I want to say publicly, and again, for the empowerment, a lot of people are not going to tell you that they don't participate and use the broadband or use digital technologies. So that's something that's going to take a little more effort from researchers to help drive this point.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to ask the people here in the room if there is another question. No, it seems we don't have more questions. Well, thank you very much for your participation, your presentation. We're finishing this session. And thank you very much as well to all the people that is here with us in the room.
Well, thank you. Anything from Dr. Burrell or Dr. Richardson?
All I would just say is that I think one of the critical things to understand about this is to really connect the dots for where Dr. Nobles carried us. Because, if you think about it, one of the critical things he brought up is, okay, we have all these cybersecurity and all these jobs. One of the things that he made a concern is a lot of these jobs require clearances and security. And that's the reason why we need to build people that are citizens, because our requirements are, if you're not a citizen, then these are fields that you can't work in. I think the other issue is when you start looking at generational wealth, certain communities have perpetual generations of poverty. And one of the beautiful things about these jobs is they pay very, very well. But how can I get into these jobs if I don't have access to the technology, or I don't have the understanding of the training to be able to leverage these careers as options? So when you really start to connect the dots, it's not just putting broadband in people's house so people can pull up the internet and look at YouTube. It's really helping people get comfortable with using technology at an early age, so they're less fearful about pursuing academic careers around technology and STEM. And then they're more likely to be viable and competitive for jobs in the future. And so I think if we can connect those dots, then we can really see the value of why this research is important and why people like you all in the room need to continue to talk about these things or spur interest or engage these topics. Dr. Richardson, you have a comment?
A lot of our students at the university that I work at are from digital deserts. I like to call digital deserts. And one of the problems is not just being from a digital desert, but how do we move forward? How do we move these students from being in a digital desert? And we're building smart cities, and these smart cities don't include the students that look like me, or students that's brown, or students that's Black. We must figure out how to build a more cognitive approach when it relates to this digital divide by including everybody. When we've developed these systems, most of the time, these systems, we develop this pipe of technology, and this pipe is only in certain communities. The university that I work for is downtown Jacksonville, Florida. Right down the street is downtown, and they have the best internet in the city. 2 blocks away, we have the worst internet in the city. Why is that? When we look at a fiber map, it has the exact same pipe, but we don't have the same outcome when it relates to technology. So I think that the digital divide is more about sustainability opposed to being about technology. Thank you.
Thank you all. We really enjoyed this, and I hope you were able to take something away from this. And, you know, as researchers, we're very adamant about changing the narrative on this and how do we address it, because, you know, me having a former military background, you know, the digital divide in this country is definitely becoming a national security concern.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Mhm.